Welcome in to another new AMP podcast. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, and I'm the news editor with the AMP Publications team. In today's sponsored episode, we're going to be talking with Will Mays, Director of Product Management and Corporate Strategy at Canada-based Mobiltex. Headquartered in Calgary, Mobiltex serves hundreds of industrial, municipal, and commercial customers around the globe. In total, Mobiltex delivers mission-critical integrity monitoring solutions on over 250,000 kilometers of pipeline assets. The company's innovative field and cloud-connected technologies can deliver significant operational, safety, and sustainability benefits to customers within markets such as energy, water utilities, and critical infrastructure. Within that scope, of course, there are quite a few topics that we could flesh out, but in today's conversation, we're going to be largely focusing on data analytics within cathodic protection. So with that in mind, we'll bring in Will right here. First things first, good afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Will, if you could, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your career in the industry, as well as anything else about Mobiltex that you'd like to mention to our listeners here off the top.
Yeah, great, Ben, and thanks for the intro, and a pleasure to be with you again. So I've been involved with Mobiltex for coming on 5 years this fall, and really started out in a product management role, and really evolved into my current role, which is still in charge of our product management function, and then participating with our corporate strategy team as well. So it's been great. My background is trained civil engineer, worked in that field for a number of years, and then ended up doing a foolish thing, getting my MBA, getting involved in kind of technology market research type work, and then kind of found myself within Mobiltex, which is a really exciting Canadian business with a really intriguing technology, really great team, and it's a really really intriguing value proposition that they bring to the table. So yeah, it's been really great. And I think you gave a great introduction for Mobiltex. The only notable thing I would add is we were out at a team dinner a couple nights ago, and it's our 40th birthday next year.
Oh, wow.
So, I just think that's kind of notable. You think about 40 years. I mean, it's, they predate me by a few, but it's just kind of remarkable. It kind of speaks to the quality, speaks to the people, speaks to the vision. We're super excited about that milestone.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Had my 40th birthday last month. So that's
there you go.
Think about that.
There you go.
You guys have been out there for quite some time, as I know all too well. So over those 4 decades, obviously there's been a lot of evolution within the cathodic protection or CP market. So let's start with the basics of CP data analytics and sort of the transformation over those years, the general concept, the objective. Just take us through what general approaches are out there and the types of assets that it's typically used for.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll speak to this obviously through the lens of Mobiltex and what we do in industry as well. Obviously, that's just one preface. But I think when we think about CP data analytics, it's really about doing more with the data that our devices collect for our customers. Because we are one of the more significant players on the remote monitoring front in the industry, data loggers, data collection, etc. But I think analytics are really tools that enable us to drive more insight for our customers, rather than just being curators of that data or providing solutions that manage that data for them. It's really about driving that insight level upwards. And of course, the flip side of that is also applying kind of, more advanced techniques to make that insight much more scalable, much more repeatable, and much more accurate, right? So that's kind of like a broad definition of CP data analytics from our lens. In terms of the areas where it's impacting kind of the external corrosion world and the cathodic protection world at present, the space that we've really honed in on over the past 5 years or so are around rectifier data. Of course, like if you think about assets that are protecting the protecting the pipelines through impressed current cathodic protection systems, the rectifiers are the most critical element of that system, and that's reflected in the importance that the compliance requirements dictate around rectifiers, of course. But that's also influenced remote monitoring and in general higher volume of data collection to be present in the industry across a broad swath of those rectifier assets. So as you can imagine, an upstart technology company starting to look at data analytics, the best place to start is to look at areas where there's a lot of data collected. So that's what we did when we first started out on our data analytics journey about 5 years ago. And so I mean, I think just to speak to that journey briefly, like we have a data scientist on staff, and a lot of the work that I'll speak to today is really championed by Matt Barrett, who some of you will be familiar with his research papers and his presentations at the corrosion shows. But we've really just kind of started down this journey, understanding the dynamics of these rectifier ground bed systems, understanding seasonality trends, modeling those mathematically, identifying the different variables of those equations. And this is truly kind of applying, I think, a new lens to understanding CP system dynamics that haven't been applied, at least at a kind of a broad scale in the past. So I'll stop there. Obviously, a pretty broad answer on CP data analytics, but happy to get into more detail.
Sure. And when we're talking about 2024 and beyond specifically, as you guys head into your 5th decade, I'm curious what you found in your research and what you see as the approaches that are going to be most commonly used moving forward. And as far as anything new, what are the pros and cons as far as, and cons, I'm curious if there are any, but if there are, what does it look like as far as the tools being used now and over the coming decade potentially relative to those techniques that you briefly touched on that have been used in the past?
Sure. Yeah. So I think I'll narrow in on a very specific application, which is kind of, I guess been something that, as we kind of delve down into this world, it kind of surfaced as the most practical thing to look at, and maybe not the most practical, but also the most impactful in the short term to our customers. And this is about, planning for a rectifier ground bed a failure and planning for the replacement of those ground bed assets. And, when we're talking about the ground bed, it's essentially, the large steel piles and steel caissons and things that are driven into the ground essentially to corrode in the place of the steel structure that you're trying to protect. So these are large civil work projects, quite expensive and involve, planning, regulation, approvals, et cetera, to go in and perform replacements of these ground beds. Again, you've got a consumable asset, you've got data that indicates or can indicate what your resistance changes are at that site, and that can be kind of backed out and kind of derived down to a consumption rate, essentially. So business as usual or traditional strategies around ground bed performance can vary quite widely. They're really quite diverse in terms of the customer base and how they plan to strategize around ground bed replacement. A more reactive strategy, which are quite common, is essentially to run the ground bed until it fails. And when it fails, if you have remote monitoring on your rectifier, you'll quickly have some alarms going off, and you'll have to plan for that replacement. And I guess the risk factor there is that you have to live with your protection system being down for a period of time, typically a month or so. Proactive strategy, in contrast, would involve an operator kind of having a very active kind of engineering review process where you're going through data in a manual level. You're kind of running computations. You're trying to understand if resistance change is changing on that site, and you're trying to feed that into a 3 and a 5 year budget plan ahead to try to understand, hey, I've got 100 ground beds out there. I've got a top 10 of priorities in terms of ones I think are at risk, and I can budget for that and replace them a bit more proactively. So that's kind of the spectrum in terms of the traditional approach. So I think one of the areas where we're trying to bring in data analytics is really to bring in new tools that can help predict when these structures might be at risk of failure, and essentially we're predicting kind of remaining service life. And trying to kind of inform these traditional practices with things that can be automated essentially and data driven. So I think some of the readers that will go through the AMP papers and whatnot. Our last paper at New Orleans was looking at 3 different techniques that you can use to kind of standardize your ground bed replacement process review and kind of standardize how you can predict the performance of these assets over time. So I guess, contextualizing what the specific application is, in our eyes, the benefits over the traditional methods are threefold. Really, it's about efficiency. So if you can imagine that, doing that process manually, involves a lot of manual data collection, creating a lot of different kind of graphs in Excel, et cetera. And then, running comparisons across potentially hundreds of sites. And we're talking about large operators could have upwards of 2, 3, 4,000 rectifier ground bed systems protecting their assets. Efficiency, on our side, once you kind of, build these models and you connect them with real-time data coming from the field, you can essentially kind of automate a lot of that process into the future. So maybe not efficient in the first year, but certainly more efficient as, things continue year on year, et cetera. Accuracy is another area where we feel like there's benefit for having kind of more, I guess, machine-driven or analytical approaches. I mentioned, previously kind of our foundational research looking at seasonality trends and algorithms to understand that type of stuff and decomposing what those, those seasonality trends look like from a mathematical basis. Having that, sensitivities around different parameters really adds accuracy to these types of forecasts. And I guess it's still debatable whether you need that level of accuracy or not. Really, you're trying to predict something that will fail within, a month or fail within a 6-month period rather than, down to the hour. But I think, at broad brush strokes, the accuracy would improve with this analytical technique. And then finally, scalability and repeatability. So, when you have the ability to create an algorithm to run a process for you, it just allows you to, again, once you have that model, once you have that core data in place, you can press play and, in an hour or so after it runs everything, you'll have a report summarizing, priorities based off certain factors, et cetera. It's just far more scalable than a manual process. So those would be the benefits I'd probably try to capture. I think in terms of the cons, I mean, there probably are, cons in the short term. I guess, like anything, you don't want to get overly excited, and you need to continue to stress test these and make sure accuracy is there. And, there's probably scenarios where it might not be appropriate. That's probably one element. And then the second component is, of course, the common phrasing around you don't want to remove the engineer from an engineering process, right? So you've got to build process in terms of making sure that smart people are taking these results and stress testing them and truly, leveraging them through the human lens into their existing engineering decision-making workflow. So yeah, it's not a dystopian future where machines are just doing all of our ground bed replacement selection for us. So.
In terms of the actual timeline moving forward and trying to look at this more practically, as far as rolling this out, is it a scenario where it sounds like the next few years you're doing more testing, you're trying to find a role for those engineers as you were laying out? What does it look like as far as the next steps when you go from where we are today with having these technologies and hopefully a few years down the road having them a lot more mainstream?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that's kind of where we kind of live on a day to day. I think the long term vision is certainly to bring these tools far more into the forefront, make them accessible into some of our our cloud based solutions. Where you would go in right now and view your rectifier readings in our cloud solution. Why not have the future forecast available to you as well? But I think, to your point, we have been progressively kind of building up on our research base in this area, and, we'll continue to do so. So, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. We're hoping to validate the approach across larger data sets. We really need to kind of continue to stress test and understand how the algorithms perform. There are different types of ground bed classes as well that, we have more mature knowledge of, and others that require, additional work. So that's kind of another area of interest for us, is like really broadening out kind of our knowledge base of the common assets that are out there. And then it's just, time and, trying to prioritize the right elements to bring into the platform. But, it's very much, I would say, in the, 1.5 to 2 year roadmap, as we kind of continue to put the building blocks in place, we'd like to have some of these solutions a little bit more readily accessible.
So thinking in terms of the end user, I'm curious, first off, if there's a cost gap compared to the more traditional technologies? And if so, if there are higher costs, is the idea that those are potentially offset by having, greater accuracy or better benefits from this type of technology?
Yeah, no, that's a great question as well. I think, I mean, that kind of hits the nail on the head in terms of like what is the value proposition, and how do you kind of, do you just go based off of a fully quantitative value proposition in terms of trying to how to figure out how to price this out, and are there kind of broader or software components to the value proposition that should be considered as well, like a decrease in risk, whether it's compliance risk or a risk to the structure as well, So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff to unpack there. In terms of the cost gap, the more practical way to look at it is what is your existing process right now? Like how much of a full engineering team's time is it to run these types of analyses, if that is something that they do, if they're more on the proactive side of the traditional approaches. And then I guess from our perspective, currently it's a more manual than we would like. So there is manual process, but certainly I think it's probably more efficient, what we can offer, for sure. So, and then your other comment around, the benefit around accuracy, et cetera, I think, yeah, definitely, the efficiency, the scalability, as this becomes something that has been, as you've, I guess, uploaded the metadata of the system, you get that initial lift in place. Really, the only data that you're uploading on an annual basis is the readings from the remote monitoring equipment. So that's all automated anyway. So yes, I think there's probably a much better benefit as you project the solution out, 2, 3, 4 years. You'll start to see that return much more evidently. And then your point, I guess, just around, or I guess my concern, my comments around that risk reduction. If you're on the more reactive side and you can avoid, having any rectifier downtime at all, then that obviously will have huge amounts of benefit in terms of the structural integrity of that asset as well.
So for clients that are considering these types of technologies in 2024, emerging regulations are a huge component. Companies want to be in compliance with what's coming down the pike from PEMSA and other government agencies. You've got environmental trends that seem to be picking up in pace with every year. How do these technologies potentially fit in with what you're seeing on the legislative side and helping these end users stay in compliance?
Yeah, I think they fit, actually really well. They fit directly into kind of the direction that both of those regulatory trends are pushing industry. On the PHMSA side, specifically, actually, a customer that we were chatting about this application with, mentioned how they see it directly impacting how they can respond to the mega rule changes. So some of those elements in the mega rule are dictating kind of more strict, I guess, response times for or interventions, I suppose, when a non-compliant measurement is encountered. So trying to then mitigate, those non-compliant measurements being encountered in the first place is far more strategically important for operators to kind of de-risk that response and de-risk the cost required for that response. So again, it comes back to that rectifier uptime. If you can plan better, if you can avoid those unforeseen, ground bed failures, then that's just one more, element and a very important foundational element to your program that doesn't require reactive work. And then you can avoid that mitigation, or at least that one factor that can contribute to that need to intervene. So that's kind of a very direct example. I think on the environmental side, I think one thing that's kind of underplayed in cathodic protection and in external corrosion management is really just the fundamental kind of connection with, the environmental kind of benefit that cathodic protection provides to a program. And that's really just around kind of, sustainment of that existing pipeline asset. An asset that isn't corroding is an asset that should be able to sustain use for, the foreseeable future, the indefinite future. So, well, actually, indefinite. I'm not sure if I said that correctly, but I think you're getting what I'm trying to say is, if your asset is not corroding, your metal isn't going anywhere, and you can move products, and whether that's some sort of more environmentally friendly product like hydrogen in the future, it still is a viable transmission asset. So, again, having rectifier downtime avoided through better tools that can help you plan and sustain infrastructure should contribute environmentally as well.
You mentioned PEMSA and Mega Rule. Obviously, that's applicable to the States, but you all are based in Canada. You've got clients all around the globe. So I'm curious if you see any differences on a country or regional basis. These types of trends and findings that you've thrown out, are they specific to the US or North America, or are most of them more broadly applicable when you look at the world as a whole?
Yeah, so a lot of the research we've done are actually on Canadian assets. Well, I would say Canadian and US-based assets. So I think, from a regulatory regime as well, PHMSA, drives the bus in the US market, but, the Canadian market also, looks to the south and kind of understands what's coming, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I would say, very applicable to both of our kind of our core markets here. But I think, conceptually, they absolutely apply to any sort of kind of cathodic protection or impressed current cathodic protection system, particularly for the pipeline applications that we've looked at. Actually, I was in Australia last year and I presented a paper. It was an Australian based paper. So a lot of we had about 200 and 10 Australian assets that we used, and we applied some of our kind of again kind of our foundational seasonality techniques too. And it was fascinating because the correlation was incredibly strong, but it was inverse, of course, because of the seasonal components are flipped in the southern hemisphere. So they are very applicable to assets across the world, of course, with the regional nuances of different anode types and different system types, et cetera, of course, are some things that you have to consider.
On the research and development side, or R&D, is there anything else that you guys are seeing when you're conducting this research on North American and global markets? Is there anything that you're looking for more data on in the coming years? Just speak to generally your R&D operation, trends you're seeing right now, and also what you're looking to find out more about moving forward.
Yeah, I think we're we're obviously deep into this kind of thematic area within our kind of our analytics program right now, and there's definitely some different types of asset classes that I alluded to before that we'd be interested in exploring, just to make sure that we can broaden it out and address the the vast majority of groundbed systems in North America. But I think like at a higher level, it's fascinating to kind of be within the space and understand the long-term migration of CP programs in terms of, driven by compliance and driven by performance. And by performance, I mean kind of the performance of the CP system to mitigate metal loss. So, a lot of, maybe the US market right now is much more compliance driven versus, the Canadian market, and some other global markets are maybe more driven around kind of holistic, CP performance. And it's just going to be fascinating to see how that evolves over time. And also, I think, and not prophesizing from a technology perspective, but how, the data analytics story will contribute to that evolution. Because I think, if we project 50 years out, I think we can all agree that, data analytics will probably be driving a lot more of behaviors in our sector. And you would think that those behaviors will migrate away from kind of strict, traditional compliance-driven processes more towards, proof points around performance and ensuring that the structure is being adequately protected with kind of empirical evidence. So I just find that very fascinating. And I think, in terms of R&D, the more we can do to try to drive those types of evolutions forward, it's just better for the industry as well.
We're winding down now with Will Mays of Mobiltex. Will, I'm curious, as far as closing thoughts from you, what you see the rest of 2024 and 2025 looking like. I know companies like Mobiltex are starting to put together sort of your bullet points for next year. What's your general outlook for what's coming down the pipe within CP data analytics? I know we've talked about that a decent bit over the last 20 minutes, but in summation, what generally are you seeing driving the market for the foreseeable future? And also, while you're laying that out, if you could throw out some contact info, both for yourself and Mobiltex, for anyone listening who might want to learn more.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. In terms of outlook, like we're having absolutely cracking year so far this year. I think it's been It's definitely been the busiest summer that we've had that I've been involved with. Again, 5 years. So typically we cool down a little bit in the summer just because CP is a very summer-driven activity. A lot of people are out performing surveys and doing work, and they don't have time to interact with the technology teams, et cetera. But it's been an absolutely corker of a year. So we're super excited. We're meeting lots of new customers, globally, south of the border, north, up in our backyard as well. So it's just really exciting to be exposed to new voices and to learn about new challenges within industry, because that's kind of how we try to kind of set our North Star from a product development perspective. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but I obviously super excited for 2024. We've got a concrete R&D plan ahead for the 2025 season, and we're looking forward to revealing some new technologies down in Nashville as well. So very excited to get down there. And in terms of contact details, pleasure again. You can reach out to me, anyone, at my email, which is WMAIZ or ZE at mobiletex.com. And of course, if you want to reach out to any of our fantastic service reps or our sales team, I guess the best way to find us is go to mobiletex.com, mobiletex.com, and we got a pretty robust website with lots of contact information there. So,
excellent insight. Will, thanks so much for taking the time.
All right, sir. Take care.
Great stuff there from Will Mays of MobileTex. And again, if you want to learn more about MobileTex and its products, as well as its resources and services, just visit that aforementioned website at www.mobiletex.com. And with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. On behalf of AMP, I'm Ben Dubose, and if you want more resources from AMP or our publications within the association, just visit amp.org, materialsperformance.com, or coatingspromag.com. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with another new episode.